It is 79 days till the man burns, and today we're talking about how to protect your camera if you are planning to bring it along with you. Because the playa dust at Burning Man is alkaline, which is very corrosive, and there's lots of nice little important bits inside your camera that are just sitting there waiting to corrode. Lots of people that bring their cameras to Burning Man end up with them damaged in some kind of way, either while they are there or, sometime down the line once they've got home. You might get your camera home and think everything is fine, and a few months later that playa dust that got inside it is like working its magic and your camera packs up. But there are some things you can do to keep your camera safe, or at least try to. So first up, probably the best way is to get some kind of waterproof housing for your camera. If it's going to protect it from water, it will protect it from dust, probably. But they can be a bit of a pain. They tend to be quite expensive if you're trying to get, a good one. They tend to be a bit bulky and just make your camera a little bit tricky to use. So if you are going to go that way, I would suggest getting it in advance so that you have plenty of time to practice with it, practice using your camera with it, make sure you can, access all the settings that you'll need to, things like that. If you don't want to shell out for a waterproof housing, there are ways to kind of DIY your own dustproof housing for your camera. I will do another video on how to kind of make one of those. But let's talk about tips on how to protect your camera if you are not getting the waterproof housing, or maybe even if you are. So the main problem with the camera is the dust getting inside of it. But it doesn't mean you completely want to ignore the exterior. You still don't want any damage to happen to the outside of your camera as well. On the outside of your camera, if you have like a DSLR or something, you've got the hot shoe, you've probably got the pop-up flash thing, there's plenty of bits on the outside you also don't want to get damaged. So most cameras, they have some kind of compartments on them, a little bit that you open up and there's a compartment, maybe your battery goes in there, your memory card, something like that. So those are perfect entry points for dust. And aside from that, if they are to hold like your battery, your memory card, they have connectors in them so that when you put the battery in, it connects to metal points, or the same with your memory card. So you don't want to damage those connection points by letting dust get in there and just kind of be sitting in there. Those little compartments, they are the enemy. You want to be opening them as little as possible. Chances are that you will have to open them at some point, especially if they hold your battery or your memory card. But when you're not opening them, you want to keep those sealed up with something like electrical tape, or, just something that's going to keep a seal over the edges of the hatches so that the dust can't get into them when they're closed. Then when you do need to open them, obviously you're going to break that seal, open them and get them closed and sealed back up as quickly as possible. It's really worth investing in a big memory card, something that's going to hold a lot of photos. You don't want a small one where you're going to need to be transferring the photos off, all of the time. You want something that's going to hold loads so you can transfer as little as possible. Think about the file type your camera is saving the photos in as well. If you're a professional, you might want to shoot in RAW so that you can do post-processing and stuff. But if you're just kind of doing more like holiday snaps, like, hey, this is us at Burning Man, then you maybe don't need to have those in RAW. I would completely avoid shooting in both, where it saves a RAW version and a JPEG version, because it's just taking up more space to have the same two files. It's just one is already processed. If you're kind of doing a combination of the two, you are trying to get those kind of professional, really, really cool shots, but you're also doing more like holiday style snaps as well, then, make sure you know how to switch between the file types so that when you're doing your holiday snaps, you're not worried about the huge raw file size that you just really don't need for those kind of pictures. Having two batteries for your camera is a good idea for a similar reason. If you need to change your battery out, instead of kind of taking it out and leaving it to charge and maybe not sealing that back up for a couple of hours while it's charging, if you have two batteries, you can just kind of quickly switch them over and seal things back up. Obviously, you can do that with one. You can just, seal it while the battery's not in there, but it just makes life easier if you have two batteries so you can be switching them out. Ideally, you just want to keep those compartments closed and sealed as much as possible. If you have other ways of charging your camera or transferring the files, maybe you have a connection point for a charger on the camera itself, or a connection point for the memory card to transfer things off, then you could use those instead of opening and closing those hatches. So now that you've got the hatches dealt with, it's time to take a good look at your camera and look for any other entry points for dust. And you want to tape those up as well. Your camera is going to be covered in quite a bit of tape probably. So with things like the buttons, You can tape those up as well. It's another entry point for the dust. It can get in around the edges, and then you're, depressing the buttons, which can push the dust inside. So what you can do is put tape over it, like an electrical tape, and just don't put it on really tight, kind of loosely cover them so that none of the buttons are stuck in a pressed down position, and you're still able to push the buttons through the tape. It does mean that you will have to memorize the layout of the buttons on your camera so that you know where to press them. So again, it's probably something you'll want to do a little bit in advance just so you can get used to using your camera with all of the buttons covered up and make sure you still know how to do everything. And if worst comes to worst, go for a light coloured electrical tape and then you could draw on it with permanent pen. I've never actually done that, so I don't know how well the pen would stay on, but it might be a way to kind of help you if you're struggling. One of the most important areas to really protect on your camera is the connection point between the lens and the camera body. That's such a bad place for the dust to get in because it's just going to be sitting, behind the lens, in your camera body, maybe on your sensor, and that dust will show up in every single picture. If dust gets into your battery compartment or in through the buttons at the back, it sucks because it can do some damage, but it's probably not going to actually show up in your final pictures. And it would suck to get back and discover that every single picture you have just has tons of dust specks that need correcting on it. So make sure that is sealed up really well with tape. Anything on your camera that you don't really plan on using, like the hot shoe or the little connection on the bottom for a tripod, things like that, you could cover those up with tape as well. And your flash, especially, the pop-up flash where it's kind of in a little compartment of its own, you probably want to seal that up as well. But obviously, if you are planning to use those things a lot, then that can be a huge pain to have to keep, taking the tape off, getting your shot, taping it back up. So if you are in a spot where you're like, no, I really like to make use of every feature on my camera and I don't want my hot shoe or my flash or something, sealed up, then it might be worth getting the waterproof bag or making the DIY dustproof bag. A lot of cameras have some kind of display on them, flip out ones or ones that are kind of built into the back. So to protect the screen itself, you can use what you would cover a mobile phone screen with, like the protector things. You can just cut it down to the size of your screen and stick it on. That's going to keep your screen protected. Bring along, an extra couple just in case, because, it is very dusty, and if dust gets under it, then it's kind of trapped against your screen, which you really don't want. If that happens, you'd really want to kind of change that out as soon as possible. If you have a flip out screen that flips out and twists and stuff, you might want to tape that down. So, flip it so that you can see the screen on the back and then tape around the edge. Because it's another thing where dust can kind of get trapped against the screen. If you get dust, when you close it, then it's just sitting there against the screen. But again, it depends on how you plan to use your camera, whether you plan to, be using that flip out screen so that you can kind of selfie or whatever it is you're planning to do. You want to keep your camera covered as much of the time as you can. If you are not taking pictures with it, you want it to be covered, especially if it's stationary. So if you have a lead that you can charge it or transfer files from, then probably your camera is just going to be sitting there while that happens. So just throw a bandana or something over the top of it just so that dust isn't settling on it, because dust loves to just collect on stationary objects. But if you're out and about or something, you don't really want your camera just hanging from your neck, loose, swinging in that dusty wind. You want it to be packed away in its case where it's got some protection from the dust. Which I know sucks. I love to just wander around with my camera and kind of shoot when I see things, and it sucks to have to get it out every time and put it away, but if it keeps your camera alive for longer, then it's worth it. You want to make sure you have some nice protection for your camera when you're dragging it around. I suggest some kind of padded waterproof bag. It's going to help keep the dust out and just give it some extra padding. I mean, cameras are pretty durable, but you don't want to be stressed and worried about knocking and banging your camera around, and you're probably going to be cycling around with it and stuff, so just having that bit of extra protection is a good idea. Also, make sure you label everything with your name and your camp location, so that if something does happen and you end up losing your camera, I really hope that doesn't happen to anyone, then at least there's a chance that it's going to get returned to you. I mean, you could have some luck with lost and found, even if you label it, still check lost and found and see if it's turned up or been handed in. But if you have your label on there, then some nice soul may just bring it back to you. The camera bag itself is going to get full of dust too, and if it has any kind of padding on it, then the dust is probably going to get into the padding. So it might be worth double bagging your camera, stick it inside a Ziploc bag and then stick that bag inside your camera case so that it's not just inside the case rolling around in loads of dust. The great thing about using Ziploc bags is you can just change them out as much as you want to. If the bag starts to get dusty, just use a new one. And again, that adds, yet another step between you and getting that amazing on-the-spot shot. You also want to bag up pretty much everything you're bringing with you, and I would suggest Ziploc bags as well for a lot of these things because, some of them are just going to be kind of sitting around waiting to be used. So, batteries, memory cards, spare lenses, filters, like anything you're bringing for your camera, ideally you want to have it in a bag. It's extra important for anything that is connecting in a way that it has access to the inside of the camera. So lenses, batteries, memory cards, you really want those to be dust free before you go shoving them or connecting them to your camera. And try and avoid having things out of those bags when you don't need them or unnecessarily. It can be really tempting to, drag a ton of lenses around with you just in case you need that lens to get that perfect shot. But the more stuff you're dragging around with you, the more chance it's going to get damaged. If you're dragging around 5 different lenses with you and they're all in the same bag as your camera, you're opening and closing that bag and probably letting dust into it, and that could be getting on these lenses. So you really want to be dragging around the bare minimum, and I mean in general for Burning Man, you want to be bringing the bare minimum amount of stuff. It's not the kind of place where you want to just bring absolutely everything and go crazy. You want to kind of cut down your kit to the things that you feel like, yes, I'm absolutely going to need this specific lens with me. You need to be careful with heat as well. It can seem like a really good idea to leave your camera and all your equipment locked up in your car. If you have like a good camera and you have lenses and stuff, they're not cheap. You probably don't want to leave them just in your camp where there's a risk they're going to get damaged or maybe stolen. But you do need to be aware of how hot it is getting in whatever you're storing your gear in. Cars can get incredibly hot and that can be damaging to electronics as well. So you want to make sure if you're putting it in your car that it's in a shady area or that, it's just not getting too hot in there so that everything is just being destroyed. Before whipping out your camera to get a shot, you will kind of want to do a bit of a conditions check just to see if it's okay for your camera to be out. A lot of people just don't get their cameras out if there's a dust storm or if it's particularly dusty, which, can be a shame because you can get some amazing shots when there is a dust storm going on or when there is lots of dust in the air. But, it really depends on you and your camera and how you feel about having it out in a dust storm, how much protection you have kind of put on it, and whether you think it's going to end up in disaster if you do whip it out when there's a dust storm going on. But in general, a dust storm might not be the best time to take your camera out. Lenses are a huge problem. There are 3 big problems with lenses. The first is changing your lenses, because when you do that switch over, that is when a lot of dust is going to be able to get into your camera body. And it's really getting in a place where you don't want it to. So a lot of people just don't change lenses. They choose a specific lens that is going to be very versatile and just stick with that one for the whole time. But I know for some of you, you will want to switch lenses at some point. So it's really figuring out how you're going to do that and get the minimum amount of dust into your camera while you're doing it. So I would say bring along one lens that is like your main lens, your most versatile lens that you are going to use most of the time. And the other lenses you bring along are kind of special lenses that you are just using to get kind of specific shots. So your most versatile lens, that is the one that you're going to want on your camera most of the time. If you go out to get a shot with one of your other lenses, when you've got that shot, you want to change back to your most versatile lens. Because you don't want to end up in a position where you've got that fancy lens on there and you see something you want to get a shot of and you can't get it the way you want to because you have this other lens on there. So always change back to your most versatile lens, because you never know how the conditions are going to go. You don't know if you're going to end up stuck with that lens for the rest of the day because the conditions are just not good enough to change it. The only time you can really get away with changing your lens is when it's not dusty, and even if it doesn't look dusty, it might still be dusty. It takes quite a long time for the dust to actually settle, especially if there's been winds or a dust storm or something. At night, it's easier because you can shine a torch and you'll be able to see the dust specks in the air, or, take a picture with the flash on and you'll see all that dust floating around. But in the day, it's really difficult to tell kind of how much dust is floating around. So ideally you want to find, a closed location to change your lens. It sucks to have to change a lens, out on the playa or something. Or when there's a lot going on, you know, maybe someone kicks up some dust, maybe a bike or an art car goes past suddenly and kicks up a load of dust just as you're like opening your camera up to make that change. So tent, RV, car, something like that. Don't think that those places are dust free, because they are not. Check it out at night with your torch or your flash. They are really not dust free, but it's probably better than being outside. And basically, you know those films where people like take guns apart really quickly and then put them back together? That's what you're going to do with your camera. Start practicing now. Well, not right now, maybe like at the end of this video. But start off by giving your camera and the lens a really good clean so they're nice and dust free, so you don't accidentally like knock any dust into it that was hanging around on the camera body or the lens. Make sure your hands are really dust free, give those a good clean as well. If you are doing this inside, then once you've kind of cleaned everything off, turn around, because when you clean everything off, you might have kicked a load of dust up into the air. So if you turn around, you'll be in like a clearer patch, hopefully. Then when you're actually making the change, you want to hold your camera so it's facing down, so that the lens hole is pointing down. If you hold it, you know, pointing up, dust can fall in there. So having it pointing down is the best way to go. Then when you're actually doing the change, you want to be fast but gentle. You don't want to be like knocking your camera around, things like that, because again, that might just jog dust inside of it. So you want to be careful but quick. Then once you get the lens on, seal up the connection, the area where it actually connects to your camera, because again, that's a nice place for dust to get in, and it's a really bad place for dust to get in. With the lens that you've just taken off, give that another quick clean just to get any, you know, dust that's got on there off. Pop the end cap on and seal that up so that dust can't get in anyway. And then, you know, Ziploc, if you're putting things in Ziplocs, Ziploc it, pop it in the bag. If you're not Ziplocking, just pop it in the bag. So the second problem with lenses is the moving parts. If you have, you know, a telescopic lens or something with a zoom where pieces are kind of moving in and out, that can be a problem because dust can get in those seams. So if you can go for lenses where there isn't too many moving parts and seams for dust to get in, that's obviously going to be better. But also kind of a pain at Burning Man, because often you want that like zoom feature. So if you are going to use a lens that has moving parts and you don't want to tape up the seams on it to, you know, stop it from moving, what you could do is cut a piece of plastic or Ziploc bag that would fit around your lens this way, and wrap it round, secure it with elastic bands, and then maybe put a sock with the end cut off over the top of it to just hold that in place. It is going to make that zoom a bit clunky, you know, probably getting it out will be easy, and, you know, going back is going to be hard when it's closing up, but it will help dust kind of being able to get into those seams so much. The third issue with lenses is that they are expensive and you don't want to mess up your lenses. And one of the ways that you can mess up your lens is if dust gets on the end and you wipe it. Because even though the dust may look so fine that it's like microscopic, and you're sure that giving it a quick wipe with your dusty t-shirt sleeve is going to be fine, it might not be. It might create some micro abrasions on the lens. Those can get worse over time. They tend to collect dust in them. You see it on your pictures. It's, you know, it's not great. It's not what you want to happen to your lenses. So the easiest way to combat that is to have some cheap like UV filters that you can just stick over the end of your lens, because you can get them pretty cheap, especially compared to lenses, and you're not going to be worried so much about quickly wiping the dust off of a UV filter compared to wiping it off of your lens. Plus, it's another little added layer of protection for your camera lens. If you have multiple camera bodies that you're choosing from, or you're planning to rent a camera or something, I would go for something that has a self-cleaning sensor. It's really difficult to clean your sensor at Burning Man. You really kind of want everything sealed up as much as possible. You don't want, you know, the lens off for 10 minutes while you're trying to clean your sensor. So if you have a self-cleaning sensor, you're not going to be quite so worried about it, because it's going to kind of take care of itself unless you have a real disaster where a ton of dust gets in there. As soon as you get home, you're going to want to give your camera a really good clean. You really don't want it sitting around covered in dust any longer than it needs to be, and the same goes for, you know, your lenses, your batteries, your memory cards, all of that stuff. And once you've given everything a good clean, do not put it back in the bag that you took to Burning Man. That bag is probably full of dust, so that needs a really good clean itself. It can be very hard to clean them as well, because a lot of them are waterproof or part waterproof, and the dust has kind of got through into the padding. So with the bag, you might want to consider kind of cleaning it as best as you can and saving that as kind of your Burning Man bag, or maybe getting a cheap one before you go that you're just going to use as, you know, your Burning Man bag, and when you come home that bag is just not going to get used anymore. But definitely don't put all of your nice clean stuff back in that bag until it's been sorted out. And then you will want to get your camera like cleaned or serviced professionally ASAP. And it can be quite expensive to get that done. So try and find somewhere before you go to Burning Man so you know how much that's going to set you back. Because it would suck to get back, take it to be cleaned, and then discover that you can't afford it, and now your camera is just gonna like sit there full of dust for 6 months until you can get it done. Because all the time it's sitting there with dust in it, that dust is gonna be working its magic, it's gonna be corroding things, and you know, it might be too late by the time you do get it cleaned. So find a place in advance, and as soon as you can, once you get back, take your camera down to them and have them give it a really nice, good clean and get it all perfect and fresh and new again. It is a good idea to have insurance, especially if you are a professional photographer and that camera is like your livelihood. But even if you're not, if your camera is just expensive or very precious to you, if the lenses are expensive, like whatever, having insurance can be good just in case something goes wrong. And have a really good read of your policy. Make sure you know exactly what you're covered for. Like obviously the best option is just no damage happens to your camera at Burning Man, but just in case, you know what you're going to be covered for from your insurance company. So I hope this has been helpful, guys. I hope you get some absolutely amazing shots while you're at Burning Man. I love seeing some of the really cool pictures that people get while they're there. And if anyone else has any tips or advice or anything for people bringing along cameras, then let us know in the comment section below. And if you see me at Burning Man this year, feel free to come and say hi to me. Bye guys.